Hello, everyone. Our next guest is Bianca Phillips. She is a lawyer from Melbourne, Australia, and she has a focus in medical and digital law. I have the absolute pleasure of speaking to her in this episode. She is a co-writer of the book Voice Technology in Healthcare, Leveraging Voice to Enhance Patient and Provider Experiences. This is a book that I am also a co-writer in, and we have a shared interest in voice technology and how that will impact healthcare. So it was a fun conversation looking at the different aspects of voice technology and law and how that's going to play out possibly in the future. Additionally, it's an area of interest that we should be considering when it comes to the future, especially with all of the emerging technologies that are arriving and the possible implications of those technologies. So without further ado, let's welcome Bianca Phillips in this episode. And please check her out. You can literally search her name on LinkedIn and find out all of the great resources that she refers to for this episode. Additionally, if you want to learn more, you can check out our book, Voice Technology in Healthcare. Enjoy the episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Happy Doc. I am very excited for our next guest, Bianca Phillips. This is going to be a fun episode. We're actually recording this right now. She's in Australia, and she is a lawyer. There's so many topics that we're going to speak about, but we actually are both writers in a book. We have different chapters in our book about voice technology in healthcare. And I think it's just going to be a great conversation because there's a lot of shared interests. We're going to talk about that voice technology. There's a lot more. I know, obviously, there's an interest in telemedicine, artificial intelligence, and so much more. So, Bianca, thank you so much for being on. Can you please introduce yourself?
Thank you so much, Taylor, for having me. My name is Bianca, as you mentioned. I'm a lawyer from Melbourne, Australia, and really looking forward to chatting with you today.
Amazing. So just to get us started off, what got you interested in law?
Okay, so my interest in law, perhaps not traditional, but at school I was actually into all the sciences. I was taking physics, chemistry, biology, mathematics, and after school, I wanted to take an arts degree, and then presented that to my family, and they said, "Have you considered law?" That's how I got into law, because it was suggested to me. So this has really been a process for me, taking law, learning about what the subject is all about, and getting to that point where I actually started to love it. When I picked a specialty area and started delving into that area of medical law and digital health, I really grew a love of the law, and this is what keeps me going in this particular space.
Amazing. Now, was there something that specifically drew you to, you obviously digital law and medical law? Was there something there that, maybe did you have interest before that, or did you kind of fall into it?
Yeah, well, I always had interest in medicine and science because of my fascination with those topics at school.
Mm-hmm.
So taking physics, I was taking all the advanced classes, extension classes in physics and chemistry, biology, and maths, and that really was initially what was interesting to me. And then when I was in law, I started in a corporate legal role. We're doing the 9 to 5, doing all the timesheets, writing letters of advice to clients and so forth. And then someone very important to me got cancer, and I became really interested in disease prevention, but also in understanding the pressures that are faced by doctors and other healthcare providers, and really wanting to understand the environment. So that took me to University of Melbourne to take a Masters of Health and Medical Law, and training myself and spending a lot of time being taught about health and medical law.
Amazing. That's great. That's great. And so you followed kind of your natural curiosity, and then, took a next step further and obviously specialized in the medical law field. Now I'm curious, obviously, because my audience is going to be mostly American. What is healthcare like in Australia? Is it free healthcare for all? Is it universal? Is it insurance based? Like, what is the general setup for the healthcare system there?
Yes, so we have a public health system, which means that anyone can walk into a hospital and receive urgent care. If a person requires surgery, there may be a wait list for that particular surgery with the public system. We also have private health cover, so you're definitely encouraged, there's an incentive to take out private health insurance. And if you don't take out private health insurance, there's a levy that you need to pay a tax time to cover that. But so we do have free public health care, and most people I know will take out private care as well.
Okay. So it sounds to me like maybe it's more coverage for general care, but when it comes to more specialized care, specific types of visits or some form of, maybe major illness, is that the type of reason you'd want the private insurance as well?
Yeah. I mean, I took out private care for that reason. And also when I was pregnant, I wanted to have private health cover, just in case. Mm-hmm. But we have a really fantastic public health system, and there are many people I know who have utilised the public health system for treatment when they've had cancer or heart disease and needed surgery, or even when they're having children, they go through the public system. So mm-hmm. We're very fortunate here.
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic. I mean, obviously there's different setups, and every country and area is different. But definitely something I was just curious about, because again, the scope is just going to be different. Now, I do want to gear us kind of this conversation towards definitely, we both have that shared interest in, technology, the voice space, and obviously how that's going to impact, healthcare as a whole, and, health education and all of those things. So what kind of started to steer you into that direction?
Yeah, so I was looking at electronic health record systems and reading studies about physician burnout rates and physician depression, and the incredible load of needing to and the need to sit there and click on individual files and read everything just did not make any sense to me. And so I see voice as a solution to that problem, and that's really what initially got me interested in voice technologies. Could voice be a solution to that issue, where you could speak to the EMR and ask a question about a patient and it would be able to give you that information? And also this idea of not having to sit in an office necessarily or in one place, being able to move around. If you're in the hospital, being able to move around that hospital, and obviously ensuring privacy, being able to still retrieve the information that you require about your patients.
Right. So one of the things that, I definitely feel the same way. There's a streamlining possibility that voice provides. When I first heard about voice technology and thought about it, you enter a very interesting world. I mean, the idea that popped into my head, kind of similar to you, is this almost perfect clinic where, you enter the room and you have a conversation with the patient and you have this very streamlined form of experience, kind of as the picture you painted, where you walk in, you can say the patient's name in the room. Obviously this would have to be, HIPAA or, secure data, and you walk in the room, and then all of a sudden you're able to, on the fly, speak to the patient. That data is, because of voice technology and how it could capture the voice, be able to capture the data, be able to call up certain things onto the screen, have this sort of seamless experience. I mean, it's a pretty impressive future if we can, and I think we will get to that point.
Yes, definitely. I was amazed. I actually saw that use case was presented at the VOH Summit when I attended last year at Harvard Medical School in August. And they showed an example on the screen of that very scenario where you'd have, a patient walk into a room and the doctor being able to talk to the EMR and the information being all around in the room, actually recording the conversation. It was just really futuristic, but, Taylor, it looks like we're on the way there. So it could 100%.
Happen. Yeah. Out of curiosity, was the company Suki? Do you know if the company...
That was one of the... Yes, that was one of them. There were a couple. Yeah.
The one I'm familiar with is, for people who are listening, it's Suki.ai. That's the one I'm familiar with. And they have a very impressive voice capture technology, which, as we're describing this, is a possible, way to, I think it's already actively in some clinics, and it's already streamlining the note writing process for physicians. So, digital scribe is already here. Now, gearing this a little bit towards that conversation, you wrote a chapter on essentially, thinking about the ethics and the law around voice. What is your chapter? What's your thinking around, what we're going to need to do from an ethical and legal standpoint?
Certainly. So I looked at, I collaborated with a US attorney on this project, Miss Heather Dixler, and she's a corporate counsel at a firm called Latham and Watkins, and she's based in San Francisco, but they're all over the world, that firm, and they specialize in digital health law. So we put together this chapter around the laws of voice, and we discuss issues of privacy, security, consent, capacity, human rights, and ownership of data. But what we've done in this chapter is we have talked about these issues, trying to attach them to a particular context. So we've set out a hypothetical scenario from different areas of healthcare and medicine, and then provided some information on the current day legal constructs, as well as the kinds of issues that we're going to have to consider in the future. So one of the examples that we gave was a scenario where you have, and this might be of interest to you because of your work in psychiatry. But let's say you have a patient who is, on their journey to recovery from an addiction, and their psychiatrist or psychologist has recommended that they utilize a voice assistant or a skill to record their thoughts and feelings at home. One of the questions that we raised is it legal and is it ethical for the doctor to request access to that information, and can the patient themselves have a copy of the transcript when they talk about how they feel? And also, what are the requirements in terms of notifying members of that family as well about what they're sharing with them? So that was one of the examples that we gave. And we talk about different examples across. Another one was when, let's say, you're interacting with a voice assistant to find out information about a child in hospital, and you have other members of the family at home. Are they allowed to hear the conversation? What rights do they have to information about what is going on with regards to their brother or sister in the hospital? And there's just a few different examples that we provided in the book.
Yeah, and I think the biggest pushback I hear, even with this, like, for example, the case of, okay, so let's say I have a depressed patient, and I want them to do a mood log or some form of emotional diary. And let's just say there's the capability, like you said, to, I don't know, let's say we just decide that at 9 p.m. every night, you're going to, describe how your day went, and you can do like a quick mood diary right at home. The biggest pushback, or the thing I hear the most, obviously, and I'm sure you've touched on this and thought about this a lot, is the privacy aspects of this, right? So, like as you said. So if this person's recording it at home, is there a possibility someone might be listening in who has access to that data? Is that the patient's data because it was in their house? Is it the office's data? Is it, and like, there's so many lines that are kind of getting drawn. Obviously, is the data encrypted in a way that's going to be safe and won't be stolen by hackers? And what happens if that happens? And there's so many different aspects of it. So how do you think around, or what do you think about privacy issues around that?
Well, one of the big hurdles, obviously, and a necessary hurdle, is that of HIPAA compliance. So, we're going to have to ensure that the skills have a secured HIPAA compliance. And then, we're going to have to really educate people on how to protect their privacy as well. People are going to have to not just rely on one party doing that. It's going to have to be a collaborative effort where also the patient, if they're choosing to utilize something within their home, they're going to have to be educated on how to achieve that kind of privacy for themselves. But it's the other issue that you mentioned around ownership of data. That is a really interesting one. That's a really interesting topic.
Tell me more.
Well, it's a legal minefield, the topic of ownership. I mean, in Australia, we have more of a federal approach to this issue, something that can apply across the board across Australia. Whereas in the US, your approach to ownership is state by state.
Right.
And that's really interesting to me. And I think what we're going to see happen over the years, as we have in the past, is we're going to have more cases coming about looking at this issue of ownership within new contexts, and then potentially, a shift in the way that we balance the control of data ownership.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a really good point because, obviously one of the interests that I know you have is telemedicine, right? And we live in, and obviously with voice as well, we live in a strange world now where a lot of the laws and the things we think about, we're very confined to, for example, in the United States, it's state lines, right? And you have if I have my medical license in Pennsylvania, right? And someone's calling me in, Nevada, right? Technically speaking, because the patient's in Nevada, I need to have a Nevada, license in order to give care to them in the state of Nevada, right? So, but I think I would imagine a world in the future where we're going to have to really think about either A, streamlining the process for licensing, or B, as I think we're kind of alluding to, we might need some more holistic kind of rules that allow us to provide care across lines, and think about, because there's a possibility here for this type of technology, for example, to really streamline not just, the United States, not just Canada, not just Australia, but the entire planet, right? And the legal aspect of that and the policy that's going to need to be written and all of that stuff. I mean, it's going to make your head explode. But I also imagine that, without, things opening up, it's going to really limit, right, the ability for this technology to really impact the globe.
Exactly. Yeah. So, the idea of being able to access the top healthcare professionals from anywhere in the world. I love the idea that I could, in the future, potentially access a physician who is known all around the world for the particular, scenario or disease that you're facing. And that's amazing. And then also opening up the ability for people who are in rural and remote regions to access care. It's really fantastic, but we will have to address those licensing issues, and it's going to take time. It's going to be a process of working through all that policy, and at some point, it won't just be a state issue or a country issue. It's something that we're going to have to tackle at this global level. I've had a couple of companies approached me to discuss their telemedicine technologies and bringing their technologies into Australia and what the legal hurdles may be. And it's very, they were very optimistic and hopeful that we could, get this kind of thing going in Australia. The idea of being able to, address all of those licensing issues quite quickly. But you'd have to, really, you have to be a little bit cautious with that and explain that it's going to take time. We can't just make this happen right now. And it's really not a simple issue to fix.
So yeah, I mean, that's a good point you bring up, right? So for example, let's just imagine a future where right now let's just say, I mean, obviously it's not there, but I have the now technology and capability to essentially have a fully operated EMR with voice technology capacity that is hooked up to this large database that's able to do all these fancy things. And not only that, but that EMR is cloud-based, and essentially that data is accessible from, anywhere in the world technically, right? And you're able to have this information, and basically through either voice detection or what have you, you're able to verify let's just assume that there's this encrypted data source that's HIPAA compliant and all of those great things. Then what? Like, how long from, because I don't have a scope for this at all, right? So like, how do you obviously you practice more in Australia and you're more familiar with that system, but how long does it really take to go to policyholders and discuss this and bring it up and try to get those approvals? Like, how long do those conversations take? Like, how long does this process take to approve something like that?
It can take years, decades, potentially, depending on the particular technology. So if I refer to EHR systems in Australia, it has taken decades. And it's, policy, drafting of policy, getting to the point where you even begin that process of drafting the policies and then drafting the bill that will then be presented to Parliament, and then all of the steps of actually getting that passed into law, followed by the reforms that take place subsequent to that. With our electronic health record system, we had the law was passed many years before the general public knew what the My Health Record system was, which is our federal EHR system. And it wasn't until the Act was passed and they were about to convert it to an opt-out model, which meant that everyone would be joined into the My Health system and automatically have data added to it, that the public said, hang on, we didn't know about this, and we have issues with this legislation. And then they had to go back and change the legislation. So, it takes years for it to develop, to write, to amend, and then consultations and so forth that happen along the way.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because, the idea, when you have a great idea, right? Like, we're very passionate about voice and the capabilities and all those things, but the idea is amazing, but the actual policy and the process of getting it on paper, getting into the parties of power, having this whole process actually happen, it happens very slowly.
Yes. That's a big challenge. It really is.
It's an interesting challenge because I was listening to this now I'm listening to books. I don't read books anymore. I just listen to them. But I was listening to this one book, The Future's Faster Than You Think, and I'm blanking on the authors right now. It's a great book though, but it talks about converging technologies. And the weird thing that's happening right now, as you know, is technology is moving so fast with artificial intelligence, with crypto, with voice. With stem cells, with 3D printing, like there's so many things that are happening right now. Quantum supercomputers, there's so much happening right now in the tech space. That all happens, but then we have this, I mean, I hate to say it, but this very slow, sluggish legal system that obviously for good reason, we want to think about the law, we want to think about the ethics, we want to think about how this will impact society. And that takes a long time.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, traditionally it's quite reactive, right? There has to be a problem has to emerge, and then we need to address that problem through legal mechanisms, whether it be that someone ends up in court to address that problem, or it be that legislation is passed, or they have to at least consider the passing of legislation. It's usually quite reactive. So we have, usually like a general law, general legislation, which is quite broad enough to capture various different technologies. Like the Privacy Act is an example in Australia, where it's got a broad legislation that can capture any technology and the privacy aspects. But then if there's an issue in a particular space, if something happens in a particular field, then we may have lawmaking to address a new law in a specific area of technology. So yeah, it's quite reactive. However, I am starting to see more of this kind of proactive lawmaking happening, and especially in this area of artificial intelligence. The conversations at the moment are quite proactive around what are the value systems that we believe in and that we're going to work towards when we're creating policies and guidelines and laws into the future. So I think in artificial intelligence, we're being quite proactive in our approach.
Right. I mean, and we touched a little bit, about the legal aspect, and that is going to be a long-standing kind of arduous task, but necessary task to think about these different areas, of voice and technology. And obviously, like for the scope of this podcast, like each of these little aspects, I mean, it could be like, obviously you wrote a chapter on it. Each of these aspects could be pages and pages of thought around, the benefits, the risks, the consequences, how to think about this from a legal aspect, from which parties, there's so many ways. I mean, I could imagine how much you could write about it. I'm curious about, you mentioned values, right? And obviously at the end of the day, when you're thinking about policy, when you're thinking about ethics, you're going to want to think about what are we trying to uphold? Like, what are the core values or the ethical principles by which, you want to consider, what, this technology is going to do for society. So do you have like a kind of, what's a guiding post or a line of certain, principles or values that you think about when it comes to us implementing, this technology?
Yes, I do. And this has been the project I've been working on as my PhD project, which looks at digital health lawmaking practices. And what I've been doing as part of that project is examining the emergence of EHR legislation into law to assess what types of values the government has been applying. And I've stated these values at a very broad level, and they're called the 8 pillars. And these are the areas of the values that I believe, need to be discussed in this space of digital health. So I can give you those examples if you're interested.
Yeah, absolutely.
So number one, the accountability of lawmakers for the reasons of their decisions, and accountability generally.
Mm-hmm.
Human rights factors, the Constitution and law as part of one, human rights, Constitution and law, clinical benefits, societal benefit, harm reduction, risk reduction, business case, and public consultation. Now, I've stated these 8 pillars at a very broad level, and if you actually examine the AI principles and values that were released by the White House, for example, they are much more specific and you'd be able to argue that they fit within one of those 8 pillars, or they fit within various aspects of those 8 pillars. So there are many different frameworks out there for value systems and principles in AI. There are many papers that have been published by academics on this topic. What I've done is I've just stated at a general level, because what I believe is that we need to essentially first agree on those core values. If we state them broadly, then we can agree on those essential values, then we can start to get into the more specifics.
Right. I mean, and of course, right, like at the beginning of all of this, you're going to have some guiding principles, and obviously there's room for interpretation. That's when you get into the nitty gritty, Section A, Part B, whatever it is, right? The language that needs to be fine tuned for people, the parties to agree. But of course, you're going to have these 8 pillars. And I love that you mentioned a lot of these, right? The accountability, human rights, constitution law, risk reduction, and all the other parts of, what it's going to take for us to really look at this technology in a useful way. If someone's trying to dig into this further, if they want to think about digital law and how this is going to really impact people, what resources would you suggest, or what would you say to look at?
Well, there are, obviously I'll refer you to some of my publications as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So look, anyone could add me on LinkedIn. Your listeners are free to add me on LinkedIn, or even if you check out my public profile, there's access to my publications there. And I did a couple of different series. So I had a series for the Medical Journal of Australia where I go through this field of digital health and talk about not only the law, but also aspects of medicine as well, and technology. And I had guests as part of that project contributing. So that's one place you can go. But you'd have to do, if you want to really delve into some of the academic papers, you'd have to really have a look at the academic journals, and that's a good place to go. And also, if you're interested in, I imagine most of your audience are interested in the position in the US, then you should check out the White House AI principles and have a look at the guidance that's being put out by the White House at the moment on artificial intelligence values and principles.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's just important for us to have those resources to look at and understand, how these, different policies even start to get created, understand what those value systems and principles are that allow us to get to, that future that we ultimately want to create. And it's even more timely now, because I think about coronavirus and this whole issue with the pandemic happening. And now technology is even more important, because all of these people are doing virtual conferencing like we're doing right now. And,
Yes.
Am I allowed to speak to my patient at a distance if I have a fever at home? Like, there's these different aspects of healthcare that, digital, work like what we're doing right now can ultimately be very positive, right? Or can a physician at the CDC, provide, some care to someone in, let's say, California? I don't know, whatever it is, but there are things that if we could figure out how to, think about these lines that we're drawing and the legal aspects of, and create something a little bit more holistic to apply technology, I think it would really benefit people, throughout the world.
Absolutely. And, it's incredible how things can change so quickly. So, a few years ago, I'm writing a paper with a professor from the NHMRC and Cochrane, and we're talking about the use of the efficacy of telemedicine use for heart failure and diabetes. And, and we're talking about from the perspective of clinical efficacy. Now, you can see the obvious benefits with something like the coronavirus in being able to access care via telemedicine and telehealth. It's not really a question of that clinical efficacy, but it's very much could be a question of the legalities of it. So I really think this is going to get us moving in digital health generally, to really tackle these issues so that we can open it up and enable people to access these important technologies.
Yeah, I mean, it's very powerful. I mean, the obvious example, as you pointed out and we've alluded to, is a patient at home who has coronavirus or is suspected to have coronavirus, and they're looking for advice, right?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, are they allowed to? Who do they contact? Do they contact their personal doctor? Maybe none of the local doctors know. Maybe none of the local doctors are accessible. Can they reach out to someone beyond state line? There's things that you know could be solved or would be a little bit easier if the access and there was an awareness around
Yes.
what was possible. So I think we're in very interesting times. There's a lot, very strange times, honestly. There's so much happening, and it's just a weird world we're living in where there's so much that's possible and also not possible at the same time. I don't know. Question for you is, we've talked a lot about different aspects of, a little bit about health law, a little bit about digital law, a little bit about what you do. Is there any topic that you felt you're passionate about that you really wanted to speak to, our mostly physician and medical student community today?
I would love to see the medical students learning as much as possible about digital health and taking courses in digital health to learn about the future of medicine and educating themselves about the future practice of medicine, how it's going to shift. You're going to have patients in the future with much more control over their information and over the process. And, just getting yourself prepared for that future and how medicine is shifting. So I know that digital health is now incorporated into quite a few programs in the US, not so much here in Australia. So for any Australian listeners, I'd say you really need to start educating, enrolling in some additional courses. And for those in the US, it's just about understanding, where we've been and where medicine has been and the history of it, which I know, Taylor, you talk about in your book chapter. Mm-hmm. The history of medical progress and the medical profession, and then looking into the future and considering the future of medicine. I think it's a really exciting time to be practicing in medicine and healthcare.
Absolutely. And we have a passion for voice, but technology as a whole, and how, digital health is going to really impact our future. We're moving into a world where the internet's just getting faster with 5G. That's going to impact a lot of areas of life. And as we progress, with all of the crazy and new and all the innovations that are coming, it's an interesting world we live in and will be living in. And something that's important, that I would close out with in this conversation with Bianca is, the future is what we make it. And the future, with Bianca, you're taking this, head on and thinking about the future law and the future ethical principles that will need to be in place before we're really there yet. And if we're not at the forefront, if we're not ahead of it, you can imagine all those episodes of, if you've watched the show Black Mirror, right? Yes. All of the crazy things that can happen if we don't get ahead of thinking about how we're going to use this technology to help people and not harm people. So I think it's just it's important, important aspect of this conversation. And one question I'll finish our episode off with today is, Bianca, do you have any specific channels you want to drop, any books, anything that you'd like for us to check out?
Please connect with me on LinkedIn. Check out my publications, especially those for the Medical Journal of Australia, which was a really interesting and fun series that I did. I have some podcasts linked on LinkedIn, and there's the book chapter, The Laws of Voice, for the Voice Technology and Healthcare book. So I'm definitely recommending that if you're interested in the field of voice, technology and healthcare, that you get a copy of that book.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time, and I'm looking forward to speaking to you very soon.
Thanks, Taylor.
And take care. All right, everyone, that is the episode for today of The Happy Doc. If you enjoyed the content, if you love that episode, please leave it a 5-star review on iTunes. It's one of the best ways to support us. Additionally, please check out those resources that we referred to in the episode, including checking out Bianca Phillips on LinkedIn. And I'll see you guys on the next episode of The Happy Doc. Take care.